What do you say to a man who just did something that shouldn't be possible? 11 strikeouts. The mound was his kingdom. The batters were helpless. And when Shohei Ohtani finally walked off that field, jersey still clean, breathing barely elevated, expression as calm as a man who had simply completed a routine errand, four of the most talented pitchers in the world were waiting for him. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Tyler Glasnow, Jack Sheehan, Roki Sasaki. A combined pitching staff that, on any other team, in any other era, would be the story. The headline. The reason fans filled the seats and broadcasters ran out of superlatives. But on this day, in this moment, they were standing in the dugout, these legends, these craftsmen of their art, and what came out of their mouths left Ohtani himself completely bewildered. He revealed it in an interview with U.S. media. And once you hear what they said, you will never look at the 2025 Dodgers the same way again. To understand the weight of what happened in that dugout, you first have to understand what Ohtani did on the mound. This was not supposed to be a dominant outing. The Dodgers' schedule was tight. The coaching staff had mapped out a careful plan, controlled innings, measured pitch counts, steady progression. Ohtani was expected to work efficiently, stay within himself, and hand the game over to a bullpen that, by any measure, is one of the deepest in baseball. What happened instead was something nobody on that field, not the opposing hitters, not the umpires, not even the Dodgers' own dugout, had fully prepared for. From the first pitch, Ohtani was different. Not different from other pitchers, different from himself. His fastball, already one of the most feared in the league, had an extra dimension to it. Batters who had studied him for months, who had reviewed hours of footage, who had sat in film sessions analyzing his release point and his spin rates, found themselves completely helpless. The ball moved in ways that their preparation had not accounted for. By the second inning, the opposing dugout had gone quiet. Not the tactical quiet of a team making adjustments, the stunned quiet of people watching something they don't fully understand. By the fourth inning, 11 batters had walked back to their dugout having struck out. 11. Each one carrying the particular humiliation of knowing they had done everything right, read the scouting report, identified the pitch, begun the swing, and still been beaten. And then Ohtani walked off the mound. In most clubhouses, a pitcher leaving after a dominant outing walks into a wall of noise. High fives, helmet taps, shouted congratulations. The energy is celebratory, uncomplicated. What Ohtani walked into was different. Yoshinobu Yamamoto was there first. The man who himself arrived in Los Angeles after one of the most anticipated free agent signings in baseball history, carrying the expectations of an entire nation on his shoulders, was standing near the dugout steps. He had watched every pitch from the bench. Every strikeout. Every at-bat that ended with a batter shaking his head walking away. Tyler Glasnow, whose long frame and devastating curveball have made him one of the most intimidating starters in the National League, was beside him. Glasnow is not a man easily impressed by pitching. He is a pitcher of the highest order himself, a man who understands, from the inside, how difficult it is to execute at the level Ohtani had just demonstrated. Jack Sheehan, younger, still carving his reputation in the major leagues, but already established enough to know the difference between good and transcendent, stood close by. And Roki Sasaki, fresh from Japan, still adapting to the rhythms of Major League Baseball, still finding the translation between the game he dominated in NPB and the game he was building here, was among them. 4 pitchers. For men who have dedicated their lives to the craft of getting hitters out. For men who know, better than anyone, exactly how hard what Ohtani had just done actually is. And when Ohtani reached them, they spoke. In his interview with U.S. media, Ohtani paused before answering the question about what his teammates said. It was a brief pause, the kind that suggests the memory is still vivid, still slightly surprising even in retrospect. Then he described it. Yamamoto spoke first. And what he said was not congratulations. It was not praise. It was a question, direct, almost philosophical, about one specific pitch in the third inning. A sweeper that had broken so sharply that the batter had appeared to flinch before swinging. Yamamoto wanted to know not what the pitch was, but why that pitch, at that count, against that hitter, at that exact moment. He wasn't celebrating. He was studying. Glasnow, according to Ohtani, said something that landed even harder. He looked at Ohtani, this man he shares a rotation with, this man he has watched prepare and compete up close all season, and said quietly, almost to himself as much as to Ohtani, I don't know how you decide all of that so fast. Not a compliment about velocity. Not a comment about movement or deception. A genuine, unguarded admission that the decision-making Ohtani was doing on the mound, the split-second calculations, the real-time adjustments, the ability to read a hitter mid-at-bat and pivot the entire approach, was operating at a speed and precision that Glasnow, himself one of the best pitchers in baseball, could not fully account for. Sheehan said nothing immediately. Ohtani recalled that he simply looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, the nod of someone processing something that doesn't fit neatly into existing categories. And Roki Sasaki, the man who came from Japan carrying comparisons to Ohtani himself, who had been described as the next great Japanese export to Major League Baseball, said something that Ohtani described as the most surprising of all. Sasaki told him that watching those 4 innings had made him want to go back to the drawing board. Not because he felt defeated or discouraged, but because he had seen something that showed him a dimension of pitching he had not yet fully explored in himself. He used a Japanese phrase that translates roughly as, "You reminded me that I don't yet know everything about what I can become." Ohtani, by his own account, did not know what to say. He had expected celebration. He had expected the easy, warm energy of teammates sharing in a good performance. What he received instead was something more rare and more meaningful, for elite professionals responding to his performance not with admiration, but with hunger. With curiosity. With the kind of honest, searching reaction that only comes from people who care deeply enough about their craft to be genuinely challenged by what they have just witnessed. That, Ohtani said, was what bewildered him. There is a version of a great team where one player's dominance creates distance. Where the gap between the best and the rest becomes so wide that it breeds quiet resentment, or passive acceptance, or simply the comfortable habit of letting the great one carry the load. The 2025 Dodgers are not that team. What the dugout exchange after Ohtani's 11-strikeout outing revealed is something more interesting and more powerful than simple chemistry. It revealed a culture of genuine competitive hunger, a clubhouse where even the most accomplished players respond to excellence not by applauding from a comfortable distance, but by leaning in and asking harder questions of themselves. Yamamoto's question about the sweeper was not small talk. It was the question of a man who, despite his own extraordinary ability, refuses to assume he has learned everything. He watched Ohtani execute something at a level he had not seen executed quite that way before, and his instinct was not to celebrate, it was to understand. Glasnow's admission was even more revealing. Glasnow is a proud, confident pitcher. He has every reason to be. But his response to Ohtani's performance was to be honest, publicly, openly honest, about something he couldn't fully explain. That kind of honesty inside a winning clubhouse is rare. It is also precisely what separates teams that sustain excellence from teams that simply achieve it once. And Sasaki, the youngest of the 4 in terms of major league experience, the one still finding his footing in this new environment, responded to Ohtani's performance with exactly the right instinct. Not intimidation. Not comparison. But inspiration. The recognition that what he had just seen was a direction, not a ceiling. What none of the 4 pitchers in that dugout said, but what all of them understand implicitly from sharing a team with him, is that what happened on the mound did not begin on the mound. Ohtani's 11 strikeouts were built in the days and hours before he threw a single pitch. His preparation against that specific lineup had been detailed and methodical. He had studied each hitter not in general terms but in precise situational terms, how they respond when behind in the count, where they chase pitches when they are uncomfortable, how their approach shifts in high-leverage moments. He had built a mental map of the opposing lineup so complete that by the time he stood on the mound, he was not making decisions, he was executing a plan that had already been made. The sweeper that Yamamoto asked about? That pitch was not improvised. It was the product of a specific read Ohtani had made during film study, a tendency he had identified in that particular hitter, a window of vulnerability he had mapped in advance and then waited patiently to exploit at exactly the right moment. Glasnow's bewilderment at the speed of Ohtani's decision-making makes complete sense once you understand this. The decisions weren't being made in real time. They had already been made. The mound was simply where Ohtani executed what he had already thought through, completely and carefully, long before the first pitch. This is the invisible story behind every Ohtani performance. The work that nobody sees. The preparation that makes the impossible look effortless. The Dodgers have won back-to-back World Series titles. The pursuit of a third consecutive championship places them in the rarest company in modern baseball history, a place where the pressure is immense, the expectations are crushing, and the margin for complacency is zero. In that context, what happened in that dugout after Ohtani's outing matters more than it might appear. Championships are not won by individual performances, no matter how extraordinary. They are won by organizations, by the culture inside the clubhouse, by the way players respond to each other, by the standard that the best players set and the way their teammates rise to meet it. The four pitchers who stood in that dugout and responded to Ohtani's 11 strikeouts with questions, with honesty, with hunger, they are telling you everything you need to know about whether this team is capable of winning again. They are not comfortable. They are not coasting. They are not managing expectations or protecting reputations. They are watching the best player in baseball do something extraordinary and asking themselves, with complete sincerity, what it means for them. That is what a championship culture looks like from the inside. Shohei Ohtani walked off the mound after 11 strikeouts and was met not with celebration, but with something better. He was met with four elite pitchers who looked at what he had done and felt, in their own different ways, the same thing. Not satisfaction. Not comfort. Hunger. Yamamoto wanted to understand the sweeper. Glasnow couldn't explain the decisions. Sheehan processed it in silence. And Sasaki went back to the drawing board. And Ohtani, the man who had just done the impossible, the man whose performance had left an entire opposing lineup bewildered and helpless, stood in that dugout and found himself, unexpectedly, moved. Because that is what he had hoped to find when he came to Los Angeles. Not a team that would admire him from a comfortable distance. A team that would see what he does and refuse to stop growing. The third championship is not just a goal. It is the logical destination of a clubhouse that responds to greatness the way this one does. With hunger. With honesty. With the quiet, certain knowledge that there is still more to become.